Venerable asked me to speak about the relationship between spirituality and ecology as I see it. And I want to add something to this, which is politics, which I know it's kind of edgy, but I'm hoping that it won't be so edgy. So I also want to thank you for sharing your practices and your lives with Maya and me, as we are non-Buddhists, and I'm so deeply impressed by your heartfulness and your dedication and your mental clarity. I really do notice a lot of that, um, because I believe that our human future depends upon our capacity to create and cultivate collective wisdom, and I see a lot of that here. Um, It's also, I would just say, helped me to develop a deeper relationship with my daughter, which is really a surprise, and because we were already very close. So I've spent the last 31 years as a professor at the University of Washington, teaching in Seattle, teaching global environmental politics. And so this is going to be a little bit autobiographical because I've just retired. A month ago, I formally retired. Although I'm still teaching half-time, it's called active retired because I don't know how to be inactive. As Maya will attest. Um, and I've been reflecting on the whole arc of my life, going back to the time when I was a teenager. When I was a teenager, I learned to meditate when I was 15. And I was also deeply interested in I was ambitious. I wanted to understand how the whole world worked. and I read a couple books by Werner Heisenberg on physics and philosophy. And I wanted to, and the upshot for me, combined with my little windows into meditation at that age, was that consciousness is the fabric of the universe. And um, I can't prove that, but that's my sense of it. And so there's this thread for me going back to my adolescence between involving meditation and consciousness, and kind of the question of what is this universe? And then there's this other thread for me that's about the environmental crisis. And I was in high school during the Arab oil embargo, and I realized, oh, we've got to stop using petroleum. And that was in 1973, and maybe you've noticed that we haven't done that yet. And backpacking. And so I had these experiences in the wilderness where I would just wonder, what are we here for? What are we, this kind of dominant species, here to do on this planet? And I often would feel like maybe we were a mistake. And I don't believe that anymore. But all of this was happening against the backdrop of the Cold War. And so there's two things happening. One is that we could bring about our own extinction through nuclear war, or or our modern way of life is unraveling the life support systems of the planet. So, wow, that's a lot. We're actually not living as if we belong as part of the biosphere. So I had this kind of great sense of dread and anxiety that really permeated my whole life, and made me work too hard and way too fast, probably. Um, so my first priority when I graduated from college was to be of help in preventing nuclear war. I moved to Southern California because I wanted to work in what I saw as the belly of the beast for nuclear disarmament. And during this work in the late 70s and early 80s, I encountered Joanna Macy. And Joanna was my first Buddhist teacher. And she helped me to learn how to work with fear and anger and despair, and how to transmute these emotions into effective political action. So I didn't deeply internalize that work, though, until I began working with students myself, and realizing that by teaching what I was teaching, global environmental politics, I was making them, or I was contributing to them being anxious, guilty, terrified, um, despairing, all of this. And so, and that happened in the mid 90s when I was teaching at UW. So, but to backtrack, after 7 years of working in the peace movement, I saw that I really could have a greater ripple effect by teaching and writing. And that would also feel more fulfilling to me. So this question of what do you do in this chaotic world, uh, it occurred to me that what I should do is be more fulfilled and also have the greatest possible ripple effect, assuming that what I'm offering is a benefit. So I got a PhD in international relations. And during that time when I was getting my PhD, the Cold War ended. And my whole adult life had been framed around the Cold War. So suddenly this isn't happening anymore. And I felt, wow, I can actually turn my attention to the second issue, which is that we're living as if we don't belong on the planet, and therefore making it possibly happen that way. Um, so I could really turn my attention to the global ecological crisis. And I also wanted to write on something for my dissertation, my first book. I wanted to write on something that was positive. And shortly before I was pursuing my PhD, the Montreal Protocol on the stratospheric ozone layer uh, was negotiated and signed, and eventually went into treaty form and is international law. That's the Montreal Protocol that has actually saved the stratospheric ozone layer. So for people who say international law doesn't matter, it matters a lot, because if we didn't have that body of international law, we would not have the luxury of thinking about climate change. So it's really powerful. We've actually shown that as a species, we can come together and save a critical aspect of our planetary ecology, which is amazing. Like, and hardly anybody knows that we did that. You know, um, so and that was politics. That was international law, and which is kind of a dirty word, but we did do that, and I do believe that we can come together and do it for other issues as well. So, but I was asked to speak about spirituality and ecology, not politics. So for me, these three are actually inextricably related for a number of reasons. So spirituality recognizes our basic commonality, that which underlies and animates our diversity. That's what I would say all forms of spirituality are rooted in, that basic understanding. And deep commonality is not just about humans, but it's about all phenomena. So I like Thich Nhat Hanh's word interbeing for this. It's this deep it's more than interconnection, it's interbeing. We are as if, elements of one tapestry of life and existence. And but politics, I would say, has become this dirty word, but actually it's about collective action. Politics is about collective action and decision making, and it's how we organize ourselves. There's politics at Sravasti Abbey, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It's a good thing. We need politics to organize ourselves. And now, as an industrial civilization, we've become a very powerful and I'd say fairly unconscious species. We've actually bumped our home planet from the Holocene, which is the geological age in which we were, into the Anthropocene. And by the way, we did it by accident. Whoops. um, and climate change is just one amongst a number of planetary scale problems. So we actually need to develop a planetary politics that's commensurate to the scale of our impact. We don't have that yet. We have national politics. We don't really have planetary politics. But so I believe this is going to require international cooperation. But I would also say planetary politics is happening across countless initiatives that are locally based and globally networked, which I would say is true of Sravasti Abbey. Um, and so there is this network that's largely not written about in the headlines of locally based, globally networked initiatives that I would see is kind of at the leading edge of planetary politics. So this thing that needs to happen, it looks like it needs to happen from the top down, it's actually bubbling up, I would say, from the bottom up. So, and meanwhile, we also, as we're going into this era of climate disruption, we need to really work with our minds. So the kind of work that I was doing with students in the early 90s, it's on a totally different scale now. The amount of dread and anxiety and paralysis and confusion amongst young people is pretty frightening, actually. I've developed something I call person-planet politics, which is really starting with the person, with ourselves, and never studying anything as if it's only out there, because everything that we think of as out there is in here once we learn about it. And so then the question becomes, can we know what we feel? Can we actually know what we feel? And can we feel what we know? Can we actually feel what we know intellectually? And then can we act accordingly? Um, so, so I guess one question is that, like, if we feel that we belong on this planet, how do we actually act with that feeling and that knowledge? Um, so I'm out of time almost, but I want to just do a quick, I won't say quick, but brief contemplative practice along these lines. And that is, I just invite you to close your eyes for a moment and to imagine yourself like a tree, and that you can feel the gravitational pull of your home planet, Mother Earth, actually rooting you and tethering you to this home planet. You can feel a grounding, and you can maybe even imagine this nourishment from the soil coming into your being. And at the same time, you can notice that you're breathing. And in your breath, there's a kind of upward movement. And there's a movement of up and down in the breath. And this sense of letting yourself settle and at the same time reaching towards an unknown future, nourished by sunlight, water, soil, countless beings across the eons, linking your breath to the atmosphere, connecting to the stratosphere, connecting to Earth's porous membrane, this precious atmosphere that unites our whole living planet. And in that sense, perhaps say to yourself, welcome to the Anthropocene. Okay, thank you.